Hello, class. Today we are going to talk about Ruth. Ruth is a woman in the Bible, and we know she's a good woman. And the story happened during the time of the Judges. Before the book of in the Bible, before the book of Ruth, it's book of the Judges. And that's during a time when Israel did not have any king. And at the time, Israel is already in the promised land. They are already in Canaan, but they are not obeying the Lord. And it's a mess during that time. And the Bible talked about there's a famine during that time. A famine means there's no food. The food is very scarce, so people don't get enough to eat and they will go hungry. So they want to look for food. So at that time, there's this woman whose name is Naomi. Because there's a famine in Israel, and they're from the tribe of Judah, and they were living in Ephraim, and then because there was a famine, so Naomi and her husband moved to Moab. Moab is a country right beside Israel. So they moved to this foreign country called Moab. And there, their two sons married two Moabite women. And one of the Moabite women's name is Ruth. So they were living there, but unfortunately, Naomi, the Israel woman who moved with her husband from Israel to Moab, she was very unfortunate. She first lost her husband. Her husband got sick and he died. And then she lost her two sons. Her two sons also got sick and they died too. So Naomi was by herself and with her two daughters-in-law. Those two daughters-in-law were Moabite women. And at the time, Naomi heard that Israel's God was blessing Israel. So Israel, they don't have a famine anymore, and they have food. And so Naomi decided to move back to her home country, Israel. As they are moving away from Moab and heading to Israel, Naomi talked to her two daughters-in-law. She said, "Look here, you guys might just want to go back to your home, to your mother's home, because there's no point of following me, an old woman who's so unfortunate that she lost her husband and both her sons, and what's the point of following me around?" Naomi said, back then there's a custom that when the husband died, and if they don't have any children, the wife or the widow could marry the husband's brother, and their children would become her husband's children, so that her husband would still have kids, like sons. So the family line can still continue. So that was the custom back then. But for Naomi, both of her sons died. So Naomi told her daughters-in-law that, okay, so there's no point of following me around, because I can't give you any more son to marry, because I only have two sons. Both of them died. And even if today I marry again and have another child, you have to wait for the baby to grow up in order to marry you. And that will be a long time. Plus, Naomi at the time is probably already old, that she cannot remarry. She cannot have kids anymore. So Naomi said, "So why do you follow me? So why don't you find another young man to marry and go back to your home where you're from. And at this, one of the daughters-in-law said, okay, and she cried and kissed Naomi goodbye. So she headed back to her home. But the other daughter-in-law, Ruth, refused. Ruth said, no, I will follow you around. No matter where you go, I will go. And so here's what Ruth said, and it's a very beautiful paragraph. Ruth said, don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. So that's a very beautiful vow, beautiful promise made by Ruth to Naomi, that she will not abandon Naomi, an old widow. She will follow her around, and Naomi's God will become Ruth's God, and Naomi's people will be Ruth's people. If only death can separate Naomi and Ruth. It's very beautiful. I think Naomi was very touched and she was very moved. So she said she took Ruth along, went back to Israel. And I think Ruth, she has a very loving heart. She wants to take care of Naomi, an old widow. But I think more than that, probably at that time, Ruth already wanted to follow Israel's God. By faith, she already saw that Israel's God is the true God. So she wants to follow Naomi back to Israel to follow Israel's God. So that's why she said, your God will be my God. And so there's a contrast that Naomi said, look, the other daughter-in-law, your sister-in-law, went back to her God and her home. So why don't you do that? But Ruth said, no, I have decided that my country's God, the Moabite God, they're not the real God. I want to follow Israel's God. I want to follow you, and I want to take care of you. So because she loves God, and she loves God's people too. So that's why she loves Naomi too. She wants to take care of Naomi, an old widow. So the two widows, Naomi and Ruth, headed back to Israel. They went back to Naomi's hometown. And the Bible said when the hometown people saw Naomi, they could barely recognize her. They were saying, oh, is this really Naomi who has left so long ago? Naomi, after going through all those unfortunate things, first her husband died and then both her sons died. I think she's probably looking even older than her age because she was very depressed and very sad. So she probably looks older, so people can barely recognize her. And Naomi said, okay, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara. In the Bible, in Hebrew, in the language of Hebrew, Mara means bitter, and Naomi means sweet. So Naomi's name is sweet, but she said, no, don't call me sweet anymore. I'm not sweet, I'm bitter. Why is she bitter? Because she got so many unfortunate things happen to her. She was very sad. So she wants to change the name to Mara, which means bitter. Actually, that name appeared in the Bible before. I think when Israel was going through the desert, heading towards the promised land, in the book of Exodus, it mentions that Israel people were very thirsty in the desert, but then they found this water, but the water is bitter, so it's called Mara. The water is bitter, but what Moses did is God told Moses that the Israel people were complaining. Okay, why the water is so bitter? So they're complaining, they're grumpy. But God told Moses, okay, God showed Moses a stick. So Moses put that stick in the water and the water became sweet. So they can drink the water again, So I think here it's a metaphor, it's a symbol that even though sometimes our life can be bitter, unfortunate things can happen. You can get sick, or you can get injured. Sometimes it's not, our life has bitter things going on, but Jesus Christ can make the life sweet. So when God told Moses to put the stick in, it becomes sweet. So our life, even though it has sad things happening, God can still turn our life into sweet, because he's sovereign, he's all powerful. And when we experience him, we experience his grace, we experience his help, and our life can become joyful and sweet. So, but at the time, Naomi cannot see the sweet things yet, right? Her life was still bitter. She cannot see anything good could happen to her. Old widow who doesn't have any husband or sons, so she feels bitter. And she said, "Look, when I left Israel, I was full. When I came back, I'm now empty." So Naomi realized that she's empty. She felt full when she leaves because she has husband and kids. And when she comes back, she feels empty because she does not have husband or kids. And she does not have money either. She's a very poor widow. So that's why she said, I was full when I left, but now I'm empty. I think a lot of times when you feel bitter, when you feel empty, you feel you have nothing. And that's the time that you turn to God, because now you realize you have nothing. You don't have any merit. You don't have any strength. It's not in you realize it's not in your control. Unfortunate things can happen. You're not in control. And you realize that you must humble yourself. You're not that smart. You're not that talented. You're not that rich. And you have to rely on God for everything. And you are not that, you don't have merits. It's like you are not, so when you realize that, that's when God can fill you. When you feel empty, God can fill you. So at the time, Ruth, the Bible said they were very poor. So Ruth was asking Naomi, "Can I go glean in the field and pick up the, basically which means pick up the grain behind those harvesters?" Because they just moved back, they did not sow, they don't have any land, they don't have any field to work with, and they did not, because they just moved back, they did not sow the seeds, so they don't have anything to harvest. So what they can do is they can follow the harvesters. When they harvest, some leftover grain would drop, and Ruth can collect those grain. That's a way God provided for the poor in the old time. In the old time, the poor did not have land, and they don't have anything to harvest. But God provided a way that they can just follow those harvesters around and pick up the leftover grain. And here you can see a picture that this is the picture name is Gleaning, as it is painted by Sean. And you can see that the women there were picking up grains, and that's how people, they pick up the leftover grain. The poor people pick up the leftover grain. That's how they can get food. So basically, Ruth is going to do that. And so Naomi said, "Okay, yeah, hopefully you can find somebody who's nice to you, and then you can do that." I'm sure Ruth prayed too. Ruth was saying, "Okay, I wish I can find somebody who's whom I can find favor, and so that I can pick up the grain from behind the harvesters." So the Bible said the next day Ruth went to the field, and she happened to be in the field of Boaz. And Boaz is a very nice, rich man, but Ruth did not know him. And it just happened that she went into Boaz's field. And then she was picking up grain from that field behind the harvesters. And the Bible said it happened that Boaz was just going there from, I think it's from Jerusalem. He happened to be visiting his field, Bethlehem. Okay, he happened to be arrived from Bethlehem and went to his field. And so he took notice of Ruth, and he did not know Ruth either. So he was asking his workers, "Who is this woman?" And the worker told him that, and this is Ruth, and she's been working very hard, and she did not even take much rest, and except for one short rest in the shelter. Otherwise, all day long she was working hard picking up grain. So Boaz was very impressed. I think Boaz already, Bible said Boaz seems to be already know Ruth. Probably the word spread that Naomi came back. You know, Naomi who left for so long, so many years, and she finally came back, but without a husband and without sons. But then she's with this one Moabite woman. She's a foreign woman, but she's willing to follow Naomi around and take care of her. So I think Boaz said, you know, he already heard about Ruth, and she's a very good woman. She takes care of her mother-in-law. She's very loving, and she's willing to come to Israel as a foreigner. Because back then Israel was in a mess. As I said, there was no king in Israel, and was really messy. It's like there was violence, there was poverty, and Ruth, as a foreigner and living in Israel, life would not be easy for her. But she's willingly, because of her faith in Israel's God, she's willingly to love Naomi and take care of Naomi and follow Naomi back to Israel. So Boaz was praising Ruth. He said, "Oh, I heard about this woman, and she's a very nice lady, and she did all those good things to her mother-in-law. So she told the worker, you must be treating her really well. Okay, you just don't scold her, don't yell at her, be very nice to her, and even maybe not only allow her to pick up the grains behind you, but even took out some stalks from the bundle, and so that she can pick up more. And also during the mealtime, the Bible said Boaz invited Ruth to eat with everybody, and then he gave Ruth a very generous portion of food. Ruth finished the food, and she was full, and she still has a lot of leftover, and she took the leftover. She was planning to bring it back to Naomi, her mother-in-law. And so that evening when she went home, Naomi was shocked. She saw Ruth has collected so many grains. And then Ruth even took out the leftover from the meal, and that's a lot of food too for Naomi. So Naomi was shocked. She was asking Ruth, okay, who is this generous man? Oh, we praise the Lord that there's this good, generous man who took notice of you and gave you so much. So I'm sure, it sounds like it's an accident that Ruth just happened to be in Boaz's field. Boaz happens to be a very generous and nice person. And it happens to be that Boaz was just visiting the field from Bethlehem so that he could meet Ruth. But I believe it's no accident. God arranged all of those. Ruth prayed, and Naomi probably prayed too. They both wanted to find somebody who is nice, that would allow Ruth to glean and pick up grain behind the harvesters, and so that they would not hurt. Ruth would find somebody who would be nice to her. So they probably prayed about this, and then God answered their prayers and just guided. Happened to be Ruth just happened to be choose the field that belongs to Boaz, And God also arranged that Boaz was happened to be visiting, and so that he can meet Ruth. So it's all in God's plan. And after the harvesting season, they, after they collect the grain and they need to thresh so that the shell can get out and so that they can get the grain. So during the threshing time, Naomi told Ruth, okay, I need to give you some arrangement, because remember in the Bible, if the husband dies, his brother or his closest relative can marry the widow so that the husband's name will not be lost, so the family line can continue. So Naomi wants to arrange that for Ruth and Boaz, since Boaz happens to be, Boaz is one of the closest relatives for Naomi's family line. So Naomi told Ruth to at night when there's nobody around, so it's easier to talk things out. So she suggested Ruth to go to the threshing floor at night and talk to Boaz to see if Boaz is willing to take Ruth. Sorry. So Ruth was very obedient. She's a very obedient woman. She said, "Okay, whatever you told me, I will do." So at night she went to the threshing floor, and Boaz was sleeping, and she went to see Boaz, and Boaz knew what she meant. She wants to, get married, and so that she can continue her husband's family line. So Boaz said, agreed, and she went to but he told Ruth, you are a very noble woman, and you did not choose a young man to marry, but you want to marry me because I'm the close relative, so that your husband's family name can continue. You are a very nice woman. I'm willing to do that. But here's a problem. By law, the closest relative has the right, the priority. And Boaz is the second in line. He's not the closest. So Boaz told Ruth, okay, I will go to the city gate the next morning, and I will arrange, I will ask if the closest relative is willing to marry you. If he's not willing, I will take care of it. I will do it. So the next morning, Boaz went to the city gate, and again, by chance, it just happened to be the closest relative was passing by. So when God is working, you can see everything it's just happening so easily. Boaz did not even need to spend the effort and time to look for the closest relative to talk to him. He just went to the city gate, and that man just appeared. God just, arranged it so that she happened to be passing that area. So Boaz was asking the relative if he's willing to take Ruth, if he's willing to buy land, because the widow is going to lose their land because they're poor. So he's first asking if he's willing to buy land for Naomi. For that one, the relative agreed. But then Boaz said, okay, you also need to marry Ruth so that the land belonged to that husband. And then that relative did not want to do it. He did not want to risk his estate, his basically his asset. He does not want to have a kid that does not have his family name. So the man does not want to do it. So he took off his shoe and gave to Boaz, which means, okay, transaction done. I'm giving up my right as the closest relative to buy the land and to marry the widow. You go ahead and do it. So at the city gate, usually there are elders at the city gate every day, so that when people have some matters to settle, some conflicts, they can go to the elders. So the elders can settle those for them. So at the time, at the city gate, there are elders. So they were all witnesses for that transaction, for that deal. the closest relative gave up the right, and Boaz took the right and bought the land and got married with Ruth. And the Bible also said, and all the people because they were all knowing Boaz was a very nice man and Ruth was a very nice woman, and they were all blessing the marriage. They were all saying, okay, may Ruth be like Rachel and Leah, so that they can have a lot of children, a lot of children and grandchildren. So you can see the marriage. It's not only it's the elders blessed them too. So if you can see God's plan, God's guidance, you can see when it's God's plan, everything was smooth and it gets blessed by everybody, and everybody agreed. So all the elders were happy and they all agreed to this marriage. And then at the end, after they got married, the Bible said God gave them a son, and that son is Jesse's dad and David's grandpa. So Ruth and Boaz had this son, and this son is going to be the grandfather of King David. And we know that Jesus Christ is also in the family line of King David. So Jesus Christ is actually in the family line of Ruth and Boaz. You can see it's all God's plan, and it's all God's arrangement, and he's blessing the marriage, and he's blessing the children, the kid, so that he can become the grandfather of King David, and he can become the ancestor for Jesus Christ. So here, and the women were also telling Naomi that, you have this one daughter-in-law, which is better than 7 sons. The daughter-in-law took care of you, and she even gave you a son, which is the son that she had with Boaz. So the Bible said Naomi raised the child, the Ruth and Boaz child. And so her life, even though it was bitter, it did indeed turn back to sweet. God can make your life sweet. So when you are having a hard time in your life, when you feel bitter, when you feel empty, you feel like you really need God. There's nothing you can rely on. You cannot rely on your own talent. You cannot rely on your own wealth, and you can only rely on God. And you feel empty at that time. You feel you need it. You feel you need God. At that time, God would work, and He can turn your life from bitter to sweet. And from this story, we can see that for Naomi, the turning point of her life, when she left Israel, when she left God's promised land and went to a foreign country, went to a country with idols and with false gods, and her life was turned from sweet to bitter. Even though when she left, she felt full, because at the time she was not poor yet. She still has properties, she has husband, she had kids, but actually that was not good. She felt full. She did not feel that she needed God, and her life turned into bitter. But the turning point of her life from bitter to sweet is when she made the decision to go back to Israel. She heard that Israel's God was blessing the Israel people. She decided to turn back to Israel. She decided to turn back to Israel's God, who is the true God. And then her life just changed. After she returned to Israel, Ruth found a good husband, and she got this new son from Ruth, and her life was turning from bitterness to sweetness. So the important decision here was to turn back to God. And for Ruth, and what changed her life is her obedience. She decided to leave her old false god of Moab, and she decided that Israel's God is the true God, and she decided to follow that God. She decided to follow her mother-in-law back to Israel. She was obedient. Whatever her mother-in-law told her to do, she did. And so Ruth is a good follower. she's a very obedient, and she follows the true God. And then her life totally changed. She got married to this very nice man, Boaz, and she even becomes the ancestor of Jesus Christ. And for Boaz, this generous, wealthy man, and his life also totally changed. He got married to a very sweet, nice woman, Ruth, and then they had this kid, which is Jesus Christ's ancestor. And so you can see Boaz, when he first saw Ruth, he was attracted to Ruth, not because of Ruth's appearance, but it was because Ruth was poor back then. It was because Ruth's nice character. And we can also see Boaz is kind of a type of Christ. A lot of times he's a lot like Christ. He took notice of Ruth, and then he showed favor to Ruth. She showed mercy, and she protected Ruth. She provided for Ruth, and he protected Ruth, and he was a guardian redeemer of Ruth. He married Ruth, and he redeemed the land for Naomi and Ruth. So he was a guardian redeemer, and that's just like Jesus Christ. He took notice of us. He showed favor to us. He showed mercy to us. He protected us. He protects us, and he provides for us. And then we know the church and Jesus Christ. We use marriage to symbolize the relationship between Jesus Christ and the church, which is God's people. So we can say Boaz is kind of like the type of Christ. And also in this book, we can see there are a lot of chances. So it was like a lot of coincidence. It's all in God's plan. God can make everything happen. When it's in his plan, he would create those coincidence so that his plan can fulfill. It happens to be that Ruth and Boaz could meet, and it happened to be that Boaz could find the closest relative so that they can finish this transaction, so that Boaz could marry Ruth. So we're just like Ruth, okay? We are poor in spirit. We need God, and we are empty. We need to be filled by God, and we are foreigners. We are not Israelite people, but because when we believe in God, we can be God's children, just like the Israel people. And all we need to do is just like Ruth. We need to leave our old life behind, leave our old way of life behind, and we want to follow our God and obey him. And Ruth did not do any work. All she did is to obey Naomi, and she did not really sow any seed, but she just picked up the grain and took whatever favor that Boaz showed her. So it's the same way. When we got saved, it's not our work. We did not do anything. It's all God's mercy and love. And all we need to do is to trust in him and follow him and obey him and show love for him and the people around us. Just like Ruth, she showed love for her mother-in-law as well. And she followed God and she obeyed God. So this is the lesson, and let's do a quick prayer. Dear Lord, we thank you for the lesson, and may we be like Ruth. May we trust so that we help us to trust you and obey you no matter what. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, see you next time.